We're interviewing Mr. Wallace Stone. It is April 10th, 2001 at the Newburgh, New York Armory. The interviewer is Michael Akey and the videographer is Eric Stott. Mr. Stone, could you tell us where you grew up?
Well, I was born in Brooklyn. Spent, I guess, the first 9 years of my life on Long Island and back to Brooklyn. I was in Brooklyn when I enlisted, too.
Okay. Where were you?
Brooklyn, New York, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
Where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
I was a delivery boy for Hygienic Ethical Pharmacy on Kings Highway in Brooklyn.
Uh-huh.
I guess I was 16.
You at work at the time?
Yes. I was on a bicycle, anyway. Rode home to tell my parents.
What did you think about that?
Well, being a kid, I thought I ought to be there.
So you decided to enlist?
Well, you couldn't get in until you were 17, and then your parents had to sign you in. My father was a veteran of World War I and said, there's no way I'm signing you in. If your mother doesn't sign you in, you're not going. So it took me, let's say I was 17 in December of 42, around January, and I enlisted, but I still had to get her permission. Around December of 42, later she decided she'd sign me in, and I went in January of 43.
Okay. Where'd you go to basic?
Great Lakes.
Great Lakes. What was that experience like?
I didn't find it very interesting. I couldn't see why sailors had to do a lot of marching and drilling with wooden guns. It truly wasn't for me. And I come from a Navy family.
Ah.
Not career Navy, just unfortunate ages and wars came along.
Mm-hmm. So when you got done with your basic, what happened then?
I was sent to Philadelphia to commission the aircraft carrier Cowpens.
Okay. Can you tell us about that?
Well, the Navy had 9 keels laid for light cruisers. And immediately the war started, they realized it wasn't light cruisers they needed aircraft carriers. So they made 9 Independence-class aircraft carriers from those keels, and they were a light, fast carrier. And I spent the whole war on one of them.
What was your rating?
I was a boatswain's mate.
Boatswain's mate. Okay. And what was it like shaking down the Cowpens?
Well, the shakedown cruise was to Trinidad, and when we came back from Trinidad, we went right through the canal. And we made the first strikes on Wake Island since the Japanese had taken it. And then we just made them all till we had suffered some bad damage in the South China Sea, and eventually had to go back to the States to have our flight deck repaired. It was twisted by a typhoon. And we did 12 battles.
So what generally were your duties as a boatswain's mate?
Well, I was a 20-millimeter gunner most of the time. Part of the time I was on a quad 40 director. And a boatswain's mate runs the deck part of the ship. Anything that has to do with anchoring, nothing to do with engines, nothing to do with below decks other than cleaning stations. If it happens topside, it's usually run by a boatswain's mate until you get up into the bridge.
So what was the engagement at Wake Island like?
I don't remember. There were so many of them. When you're on an aircraft carrier, the planes come and go. Mm-hmm. All you do then is fight off whoever they can send out to try to sink you, mm-hmm. and then land the planes and then get out of there. And it happened, time after time. At night, in the evening, you get torpedo plane attacks. In the early morning, you get torpedo plane attacks. And in midday, the dive bombers and later the kamikazes would come out of the sun and attack you. Gesundheit.
Okay. Was it pretty good crew?
Good crew? Yeah, I thought so. You really got to be friends. Got to be quite close. Topside people. The Airedales, or those that took care of the planes, they were like a separate group. They were very clannish. The deck gang was very clannish. The black gang was very clannish. But there was always, you were part of a large group, whichever group you were in.
Excuse me, this.
What is this?
Mr. Stone, you were mentioning that, well, first of all, how big is a crew of a light aircraft carrier?
Well, it's in, you've got the papers.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, if it was peacetime, it would have been about 900, and because of the war, it might have been closer to 1,400.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're mentioning that the various crews within the aircraft carrier, the flight deck crew, they were relatively, they kept to themselves?
You know, it's not that they kept to themselves. They did similar work. They all had the same sleeping compartment. They became close friends, and they were we called them Airedales because they had to do with the planes.
Mm-hmm.
And the deck crews stuck together. You know, gun crews, deck crews. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we had a Marine contingent aboard the ship too. They, of course, stayed to themselves.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And it wasn't because, like, you know, they didn't talk to each other. It's just they became closer because they had a similar background or job.
Have you kept up with any of the fellows you crewed with?
Well, they have a reunion every year in Cowpens, South Carolina. And Cowpens, South Carolina has given the crew the town. I mean, they just go there and just own the town for the period of time that they have a reunion. Then they made a new Cowpens. The original one should have been a cruiser, so the new one is a cruiser, a missile cruiser. Mm-hmm. And they've invited them to come to the reunions, which they've done. Other than some small correspondence that I've had with the people during the reunion, no, I've never gone to the reunion. And I only, since I got out, I said maybe 2 times people came to visit me in Brooklyn, mm-hmm. maybe 3. Mm-hmm.
Now, your first engagement was at Wake Island, mm-hmm. and were you manning 20 millimeter at that point?
Yeah.
Okay. What was action like during an engagement for a gun crew?
That particular one, or anyone in general?
Anyone in general.
Well, it's usually, the 20 millimeter was the, you know, we had no 5-inch. We had to like sit under the protection of some other cruisers, such as the Canberra. I used to always love to see her on our starboard side because you could like tuck into under her guns. And a 20 millimeter is only good for 2,000 yards, and a 40 millimeter is good for about 10,000 yards. And long before that, the destroyers, cruisers, battleships, you know, the big ships were already firing. Mm-hmm. So by the time the planes could get to us, there was damn few of them. Mm-hmm. But we were the target. The aircraft carrier was the target.
Mm-hmm. Did ever get hit? Did the ship get hit?
We were hit by a torpedo that didn't go off. Oh. We were never hit by a bomb.
Any kamikaze hits?
No.
Did you experience any kamikaze attacks?
Oh yes, from the Philippines on.
Mm-hmm. What was that like?
It wasn't much different. I mean, it was just like a dive bombing attack, and we didn't understand. They just kept coming, and they, of course, came out of the sun. Mm-hmm. But once we realized what they were up to, I remember we were firing at them long before they were in range. And they, surprisingly enough, the least, unless they had kept a bomb aboard, the least damage done to a ship was by the kamikaze. Mm-hmm. It was bad for personnel and bad for, you know, things on top side, but it wasn't as bad as being hit by, say, an armor-piercing bomb or a torpedo.
Did you have any thoughts about the kamikazes and what would lead these people to do that?
I was 17. I was indestructible. It really, you know, it was like it was a game. Mm-hmm. I don't think we ever thought that we could get killed.
Did you become a shellback?
Oh, many times. So we operated right on the equator sometimes, and then the international date line, so you became a shellback, and then you became a golden dragon. And like in one day, we might have crossed the equator 60 times, just because we were launching and recovering planes.
Did you, the first time you became a shellback, did they have the ceremony?
Oh, yeah.
What was that like?
Well, all the old timers, the regular Navy guys, were dressed in, weird costumes, and we were like beaten and painted with grease and hit on the head with eggs, and just a lot of silly nonsense.
Did you get a certificate?
Oh, yeah.
Still have it?
I still have the card that you could carry, both as a shellback or as a Golden Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And I have another certificate that came from the cruise of Santa Fe. We were used as bait one time in the Philippines to pull the Japanese fleet out. And like after every attack, they'd retire some ships. And at the time, I think the Independence and one of the big carriers were hit. And it was to suck the fleet out, which worked. And somebody on the Santa Fe made up these certificates, and it has things like, a hat over a brick and a mouse trap and all that. And it says, due to the superficial qualities of Wallace B. Stone, and it goes on like with that. And I've kept that all these years.
Oh, that's amazing. Did you know at the time you were being used as bait?
I don't think so. As a matter of fact, when I got the thing, I wasn't quite sure what it meant.
Then you found out.
Yeah.
It must have been quite a thought. Now, you were in at least one typhoon?
Yeah, I guess I was in 3, but we were in one really bad one that was, one of Halsey's big mistakes. Mm-hmm. And like the shields on the sides of the guns, armored shields, were just twisted right around the barrels. The flight deck was askew. And they couldn't, I guess at the time they needed the carriers out, they couldn't send us back, so they fixed it at a repair ship in Ulithi or one of those crazy islands. And then we went on other operations, and at some point there, just around Okinawa time, they sent us back to the States to get the flight deck repaired, and then we came right out and went back to Okinawa again.
Mm-hmm. So what type of missions was the Cowpens doing? Is it support or?
The big carriers were senior to us generally, and they carried admirals. And if there was a choice mission, they were more likely to get it. We flew what they called CAP a lot, Combat Air Patrol, so that the way the ships and the fleet was set up, the outer rim was destroyers, and they got the brunt of whatever was coming in. And the CAP tried to intercept before they got there, before they got to the ships at all, because they couldn't operate right over us because they get shot down too. But on other occasions when there were smaller groups, or when we first went out there wasn't so many carriers, then we did the same thing the big carriers did.
Mm-hmm. Any shore leave during your stint?
When we first went out there, our most forward base was Pearl Harbor, which was interesting sailing into that. And the only place you could get liberty if you got back to Pearl Harbor. But then once we had the Marshalls and the Gilberts, the stepping stones, we didn't get back anymore. Every third day, we would refuel from a tanker. And every morning, the destroyers would come alongside and we'd give them fuel. Then when the tanker was alongside, they'd also, send over bombs and ammunition and food or whatever you needed, so you didn't get back.
Mm-hmm. What was it like sailing into Pearl Harbor for the first time?
Very quiet.
Really? Now, when was the first time that you sailed there? Do you remember?
1943.
Okay.
And of course, the fleet was just sitting there on the bottom.
Yeah. So, what was going through your mind as you looked out?
I don't know.
Now, you were the first aircraft carrier in the South China Sea?
Lieutenant. I say, I don't know if we were the first carrier into the South China Sea. There were other carriers there. Mm-hmm. And we were the first carrier into Tokyo Bay for the occupation. But while we were in the South China Sea, it's the other side of Luzon, we were raiding along the China coast and the Japanese coast.
Mm-hmm. When did you, where were you when you heard that the bomb was dropped? Or what impression did you have when you heard that?
I think getting married the other day was too much for me. We were raiding Japan, the coast of Japan, and we were told to pull back 300 miles to refuel, which we thought was kind of unusual. And then the ship's newspaper came out with this business about an atomic bomb being dropped in Japan. Well, we had no idea what that was. And then we went right back in again and raided again, and then we were told to pull out again, and then they dropped the second bomb, and we read in the ship's paper about that. Feelings about it? I don't know.
Or it didn't strike you at that point? Did you realize that it was going to be over?
No, because we didn't know what they were. And you were always so, I mean, the whole idea was to keep everybody busy. You were so busy doing something that all you ever were was tired and hungry. And you didn't really have time to worry too much about what was happening around you. You just did everything because that's what you were trained to do. The ship is like a big team. Even though this group does their thing and this group does their thing, it still is a team that operates continually.
Who was did you have one captain throughout most of the...
No. No, they regularly changed captains and they changed admirals and they changed air groups. The crew just went on and on and on.
Why did they change captains all the time?
I guess they got worn out.
But the crew could go on and on.
Yeah.
So you heard that the Japanese had surrendered, and you're off to Tokyo Bay.
Yeah, we were the occupation carrier. When the fleet went into... First of all, we thought it was going to be a Navy occupation because we were there. And Halsey really had said that he was going to ride the Emperor's White Horse through Tokyo. Well, the Japanese wanted no part of Halsey, but anyway, the fleet Marines and a certain amount of sailors trained to be the occupying force, which never happened. But when the ships went into anchor in Tokyo Bay, we went in, but we stayed underway so that we could launch planes if we had to. We just kept going around in circles. And we were called the occupation carrier.
What was it like to sail in Tokyo Bay?
It wasn't much different than sailing in
the other port.
Yeah. Nobody was shooting at us.
Well, that was a good thing. Let's see. Remember anything about the Okinawa campaign at all?
Well, the Okinawa campaign was a lot longer than the time when the ships got badly beat. We missed part of that because we went back to the States at the early part of the Okinawa to have the flight deck fixed, and when we came back, we went right back into the Okinawa thing again, but the landing had already taken place. And I don't know, 500 or 600 ships got hit, but we weren't one of them.
Now, you mentioned on the typhoon off of Luzon that it was one of Halsey's big mistakes. Why is that?
Well, the Japanese had two fleets. One came out in the southern end of the Philippines. There were two straits, the Surigao Straits, and I forget the other name of them. Yeah, San Bernardino, right. And their really active fleet came through that way, where the landing was taking place at Leyte. And they had a northern fleet, which we didn't know and Halsey didn't know, had expended most of their planes. They were just, carriers with very few planes and a couple of wagons and I guess some cruisers. And Halsey thought that was the fleet. So he broke off the third fleet or the fifth fleet changed depending on which admiral it was. And if it was Halsey, it was the third fleet. He took the majority of the third fleet after that northern group that was coming down from the north, which was a Japanese trick and a decoy. When he pulled the main part of the fleet, leaving the baby flat tops behind to support the landing, they came through the straits. They sent in the destroyers to try to stop them. It's really silly. I'm feeling sorry for somebody else. I had nothing to do with it.
It's Quite all right.
Well, we were badly outgunned and outmanned there. Not me, I was running north. And
Now, did one of the baby carriers get hit in that action?
oh yeah, I think one was a Cambia Bay, but the biggest shells were going right through them without exploding, because they weren't armored. And
Okay, and that's around the time that the hurricane was off of Luzon?
well, that was later. But the thing that always got me, when they sent the destroyers in to face battleships, send in the little boys. And they took a terrible beating.
So you were basically there to buy time?
Huh?
You were there to buy time?
No, it wasn't us.
Okay,
They were
the
sending
other-
this, it came over the radio, send in the little boys, is when they sent in the destroyers to try to stop battleships and heavy cruisers. Halsey realized up north what was happening. Of course, we turned around and came rushing back, but they took a terrible beating before we ever got there. I don't know why I'm emotional about this. It had nothing to do with me. I was nicely running along with Halsey.
It's,
I think it's old age. I had the same thing. I told you I got married the day before yesterday.
Yeah.
Same thing. It broke up there.
Well, that's quite all right. That's quite all right. So, how long were you in Tokyo Bay in occupation duty?
Gee, I don't remember the amount of time, but that's when they started sending guys home, and I came back to the States on a big carrier, the Ticonderoga, and got a 30-day leave.
You didn't have enough points?
No, I was regular Navy. I was on a skivvy cruise. You had to stay until you were 21. And they put me on a destroyer tender after that.
What was that like, going from an aircraft carrier to a destroyer tender?
I was very lucky. No, it was completely different, but you know, they didn't expect that another war would come along. But the experience that I gained on the destroyer tender kept me off an aircraft carrier the second time I was in for Korea. I ended up on the same type of a hull, but on an attack transport, which was a lot better in case that became a World War II. You get smarter with age.
Sometimes.
Yeah, I was already 21, what the hell.
So you got out at 21?
I got out the first time at 21, yes.
21, and that was about 1940?
When I got out?
Yes.
I got out in 46, my terminal leave ran into 47.
Okay. And you decided to go into the reserves?
Yeah, I joined the reserve before I got out.
Seemed like a good idea at the time?
Yeah.
Okay, and what did you do in civilian life?
I was a policeman in New York City.
Okay, and so you went back to,
Well, I joined, the first time I got out, I then became a policeman. The second time I got called back in, I was called back from the police department, so that when Korea was over, I went back into the police department again.
Okay. So all right, you're in New York, it's right after World War II, you become a policeman. All of a sudden, it's this police action over in Korea. Did you think that you'd get called up?
No, but my first wife, deceased wife, called the precinct and said, have them call me. So I called her. I said, what's the matter? She said, you have to go back in the Navy. I said, what are you talking about? She says, well, there's a letter here, and it's got a 10-cent stub in it so you can ride the subway to Brooklyn Navy Yard. Anyway, back in again.
So what was that experience like?
I saw no bad action. You know, it was very easy. We one time dumped off some Marines into Korea, but nobody shot at us.
Okay, so you were in for what, about 2 or 3 years?
Pardon me?
You were in for what, a couple of years?
I owed them 3 months and they extended me a year.
Oh, okay. Generous.
Mhm.
And once you got out...
And I had a wife and a child at that time.
Once you got out after Korea, you went back to the police department. And what happened then? You stay with the police department?
Oh, yeah, I worked undercover for 13 years.
Oh.
I was a sergeant. It was a good job. I liked it.
Mm-hmm. And now, were you able to benefit from the GI Bill at all?
Yeah, they paid for me to go to Delahanty to become a cop.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I studied for the sergeant's test, I went to Delahanty, they paid for that. And then when I went for the lieutenant's test, I suppose they paid for that too. It was quite good. I didn't go to school until much later.
Mm-hmm. Did you know Bob Pettit at all?
Pettit?
Pettit.
Yeah, a cop.
Yes, he was.
In the 66th precinct?
He was a detective at one point. He also became
He lived on Staten Island, it's the same one I know.
it may well be, he was in the National Guard.
But he was too young to be in World War II.
Must be different, Bob Pettit.
Oh, he might have been in Korea, but not World War II.
This one was in World War II.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Any general thoughts about your experience during World War II?
General thoughts?
Just summary, the general impression.
When you come out in one piece, like you wouldn't give up the experience for anything. I mean, it was really something. You know? I suppose it made a big change in who you became.
Mm-hmm. So you saw it as a positive experience for you?
Oh yes. Of course, you would think to yourself, hell, I could have been a brain surgeon the amount of time I was in. And I never got wound up to really go back to college, finish college.
Very good. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Great.